Express.
Hey, this is Todd. I'm outside breaking up the monotony of our new coronavirus reality. Take a walk through the park. Probably going to stop and get some groceries, but it's difficult to record at home. I'm in a small apartment with my partner, my wife, and my daughter, and between the three of us, space gets kind of tight. So it leaves me with only sort of late nights and potentially early mornings, though they wake up earlier than me. So early mornings are out to record. So I'm trying to figure out how to manage that. It's been tough the late nights because my wife's been staying up late with me, and then I'm just too tired. And our day jobs are both busy, so I don't get any breaks during the day. And at any rate, my wife chews up a lot of internet bandwidth because she's on calls all the time, making streams difficult. And then again, just for having a quiet studio-like atmosphere, it doesn't quite work, especially with the 5-year-old, soon-to-be 6-year-old, running around. But I did think I could throw together a quick video while I'm on the move, and I thought it was a good time to talk about theater of the mind. So I think if a lot of people have decided to take their games online using Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds or some other virtual tabletop, but not everybody wants to do them. They don't work for everyone, and a lot of times maybe you just don't have the assets and things lying around, because once you get into that sort of realm, you have to figure out maps, and everyone wants icons and all kinds of jazz, and maybe you don't have it for what you're running. You don't want to put the time into creating it, and maybe you don't want to buy it. Of course, there are other methods of running games online, either via text or via voice, but those generally tend to be relatively image free. Maybe you're putting up static images, but you're not using the sort of what's the word I'm looking for, dynamic maps and battle maps that you could deploy onto the virtual tabletop. So you might think, hey, I'll run it Theater of the Mind. Well, here's a few, I'll call them tips and tricks, guidelines, maybe, good ideas, good operating principles for running Theater of the Mind. For myself, I've run Theater of the Mind and played in Theater of the Mind most of my gaming life, just never had tons of minis for the most part. My friends usually didn't have tons of minis either. So we always gravitate to that style of play. So it's something I'm very used to on either side of the screen. I think really the main point of this, if you want to take one thing away from this ramble, it would be to try to remember that you have to be successful running a Theater of the Mind, you have to have a really good shared understanding of the fantasy reality. That is, that when you're picturing what a given situation in your game looks like, that your players are picturing the same. And if you're a player, that when you're describing what your character's doing in the space, that it is the same in your mind, more or less, as it is to the GMs. So the few things I'm going to talk about are basically all going to fall under that same umbrella, if you want to give one, which is ensure that the entire table, as much as possible, is sharing one version of this reality. Because if there's one thing that'll trip up Theater of the Mind in different ways, it's when one or more players at the table have conflicting ideas of what the world looks like. When one party thinks they can go there, or thinks they're safe and something can't go there, or thinks they can reach that or they can't reach it, or whatever, however it may be, that's where you're going to run into those head-scratching moments, those moments that will bring the game to a halt when suddenly two or more people are looking at the world, thinking about it in their mind, and finding that their versions don't match up. So as a GM, what can you do? Be concise in your descriptions. It's easy to forget if you're used to playing on something like Roll20, that people can just count out the squares, count out the grids, count out the hexes, whatever style of grid you're using from A to B. So you can feel free to be flowery, but maybe imprecise in a layout, because it's your characters can just count the squares. Well, if you're playing Theater of the Mind, there are no squares. So it's okay to be precise. It's okay to say out to the edge of your vision, and then remind them that's 60 feet or 90 feet, or it's 30 feet away, or the ceilings are 10 feet high. And if you want to be more mysterious, you want to give it more I don't know, more flavor, you can. But try to make sure that at some basic level, everyone's going to be able to understand the kind of measurements you're talking about. You want to say it fades into darkness, the ceiling of some immense cavern. Say it's at least, the edge of your firelight, which is 60 feet away with a torch. So you say, okay, or I don't know, maybe it's 30 feet, whatever it is. Whatever, your light source goes out 60 feet, and it seems to go beyond that. Okay, so you haven't told them how tall it is, but you told them it's at least 60 feet, right? So give them that concise measurements. That way you can all visualize what it is. And if you're going to give, you want to be more flowery, feel free, but have some basic unit that you're still going to give out, in addition to being flowery, just so everyone kind of understands where they are. I think the next big thing is really to be comfortable with approximation, because you're not going to have things laid out on a grid. So, for example, you say, okay, there's a group of 20 goblins attacking the players. The wizard in the back of the group says, I cast fireball. How many can I hit? Well, you could stop the game and get a piece of paper and start doing calculus and trying to figure out what the layout of the goblins are and how many there are and how far apart they are. Or you could just roll some dice and say, hey, you can get this many. All right, so there are 20. We'll say we can't get all of them. But maybe we'll say, hey, we'll give you 3d6, or we'll give you 2d6 plus something, or we'll give you 3d4. Come up with a number that sounds about right, and then go with it. And from the player side, be ready to just be willing and able to accept the approximations. You could say, oh, but I want to maximize it. Make sure I get as many as I can. Well, the dice have told you that's the maximal number. And you can play with it a little bit. You can say, oh, well, if you do this or that, you can get a few more, but now you're also going to get the party fighter who on an earlier turn went up and got into melee with some of them. So you could play with it, but as a GM, be flexible, get ready to approximate. As a player, be willing to accept those approximations, because that's going to keep the game flowing. If you have to stop and create a mini battle map to try to figure out all this stuff, well, then there's no point in playing without the battle map, because it would have been faster to just lay them out. And you also avoid, the one reason I like dice is it just avoids the temptation to rig the numbers in my favor if I'm the GM. I'm always trying to be cognizant of that. Am I doing this? Am I accidentally, because I want this encounter to be an important one, that maybe I know the fireball's coming and I gotta lay them out in a grid, so I just lay them out so suddenly they're all spaced out 10 feet apart. But if the caster didn't have fireball, they'd all be 5 feet apart. If I just create some dice for it, and I just say, okay, it's 20, and maybe I'll say, maybe you could potentially get all of them. I don't know, maybe you can, I don't know. Again, this is just a rough example. I might look at what is the radius of a fireball and figure out what the maximal could be and work from there. But, 20 would be what, four ranks of 5 deep. So I don't know, you could put a fireball, you could get most of them. I don't know, whatever it is. But if you figure out the dice and roll it, you can kind of do some clever things with that, right? You can use the number of dice that you're rolling and the size of the die to affect what your minimum, maximum, and average numbers are going to be. So you can think about it and go, okay, if I roll D4 5 times, it's going to be really hard to get 20 out of that, but you're at least going to get 5. Because if you roll a 1 all 5 times, you're going to get 5. And you can look at the curves. You can go to anydice.com if you're interested, and you can look up all kinds of things to figure out kind of where the probabilities are. So you can have some fun. Or if you want to play fast and loose, roll D20. Same thing, but the probabilities will look very different Minimum you can get is 1, which for a fireball you'd think is ridiculous and would probably be objectionable, but maybe even let the player choose. Say, hey, how do you want to roll this out? If you roll a d20, it's a high risk, high reward. Because you got a 5% chance of catching all the goblins, and you got a 5% chance of catching one of them, which you can create in the fiction how the wizard flubs the last line of the spell and the fireball totally misfires, goes off in a corner and just hits one goblin. So you can even make that something to play around with. But ultimately, what you want to do is be flexible, deal in those approximations, because that's going to keep the game going. And that's usually what I say to people on a small aside, that when people get frustrated or they talk about, oh, you have to run this game, you can't possibly run this game without minis. A lot of people say, and a lot of people, myself included, say, well, we ran this game for years without minis. What the secret is, and the secret is just that. Be fine with those approximations. Yes, we know it's a cone. And yes, if you want to be absolutely accurate, you should lay that cone out, place everything. But of course, there are many times when you don't have the books, or you don't have the grid, or you don't have the tools to draw out a cone and have any concept of real accuracy. So what do? You just rough it out. I'm here, they're there. How many are there? I think you can get that many. And you move along. And if you can do that, if you can play with those approximations, be comfortable with them on either side of the screen, it'll be a lot more enjoyable experience. Just waiting, with the social distancing stuff, you got to wait for people to walk by, try to pick your spots. I've been picking all these little back trails they have in the park, which has allowed me to be mostly by myself, but not completely. I think this one's coming to the road. I'm trying to avoid there's one, I'm in Prospect Park, and there's one main loop. Go around the loop. That's usually where the most people are, and of course right now I'm trying to avoid people, so hit the loop, so I'm turning back. And that reminds me, I think I had one more I was going to come up with, but I'm trying to think if there's anything else that there is. Oh, I would say one thing. I don't know if this is a to-do or must-do. It kind of along the line. So I guess the third thing I would say is be open to interpretations. This, I think, is actually a strength of Theater of the Mind playing in general, which is that I think that you're most likely, this is what I'm thinking, feel free to disagree, but when you're playing with Theater of the Mind, you're given a description, and you end up filling that space in your brain. So, say, for example, we say, okay, where there's a brawl breaks out in the tavern, and your mind fills in all these details. Even if I, as the GM, haven't specifically described those details. Tables, chairs, where the bar is, where the stairs are made to go up to the rooms, part of the inn, part of the tavern. All these different elements, where the kitchen is, all that stuff, where the fireplace is. And I tend to think if you're playing on a grid, then you're going to stick to what's written out on the grid, drawn in there, whether it's hand-drawn, whether it's from a third-party asset. You're going to tend to see tables where the grid has tables, see things where the grid has them, and if the grid doesn't have them, I don't think your mind really as readily fills in the details. I think you just look at it and you say, well, there's nothing there. Because the grid says open space, so there's not open space. Whereas I think at the other mind, you might say, oh, if it's the middle of the fight, are any bottles on the floor, any mugs, any chairs that have fallen over, a stool, anything, right? A rug, was there anything there? That kind of thing. And so I think when you're playing, it's important to really lean in to those interpretations. It's fine to have to correct the players if the player says, oh, I turn to my right and I jump over the bar to take cover behind it. And you say, well, actually the bar's to your left. Fine. But really allow them to use that stuff that their mind has filled in and really play with it. Let them go and let them, pick up something that's on the floor. Let them reach for whatever it is. Let them just take a table, even if there was no table in your depiction, in your brain, they've said, oh, there must be a table right here. Let me, prop it on its side and use its cover. Let them do it. Make that part of the fiction. I think that it really helps everybody. I think it helps keep everybody engaged, because again, it's part of that shared space. And if that's how they see the tavern, then let that, you want to reinforce how they're seeing it. So yeah, give it to them. I think it will also help other players get involved, because then when you describe the table being pushed over, and then maybe there was a bottle on the table, or there were some mugs, or maybe there was something else there, then suddenly that gives the next player an idea. Oh, well, then I do that. And, you can keep riffing like that. So embrace it. As a GM, embrace that imagination, because you really are in theater of the mind, right? That whole thing, theater of the mind, we really are relying on the mind to do a lot of hard work for us. So really embrace it. When you see that imagination that's bubbling out of a player's mind, lean into it. And as a player, I don't want to say be aggressive, but just, mine that imagination. You really use it. Think about, well, what does make this a tavern? What is in there? What can I use? What can be useful? What does this terrain do? And really take that and really have fun with it. Because that's really, I think, the joys of playing all these games, right, is that we're taking the stuff from our minds and putting it in action. And I think theater of the mind, in some ways, to me, is the most extreme end of it, because you're relying on your mind for everything. You're not looking at a graphic on a table. You're not looking at a graphic on a monitor and seeing what can I make of it. You're really thinking about, well, how do I imagine this tavern and what can I do with it? So really, play with that. So just to wrap this thing up, I really encourage everyone, if you can't get into Roll20, can't use Fantasy Grounds for whatever reason, heck, even if you can, give Theater of the Mind a go. You may find it engages you in a whole other way. You might even like it better than doing it the other way. If you're going to do it, I think I break it down to basically 3 main tips. So all of them are, right, we're trying to engage in a shared reality. So do everything you can to get everyone on a shared reality, and then keep everyone there. And then once you're there, right, be concise. Remember, everyone's going to be using the rulers in their mind to measure everything out and figure everything out. So give them the data that they need to do that. That'll be 1. Number 2, embrace approximation. It'll help the game flow a lot faster. Don't worry about absolute accuracy. Don't let that slow you down. In a way, it's that saying of don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. Just take it, right? Okay, so you can only hit 8 goblins with your fireball. That's what the DM and the dice decided. That's what, the table is like, okay, and maybe you think in your mind you could have maximized it to 10 goblins. So what? Let it go. Sometimes it'll work in your favor. Sometimes it may work against you. The point is, just take it in. It'll all even out over time. Let it go. Run with it. And the third thing would be really embrace your imaginations. Be flexible. When your mind, whether it's the GM or as players, are just filling in these details, run those details. Be good with them, and don't try to be too strict to some version of the world that only you see. You may have the module in front of you, and the module may say X, Y, and Z, but if the players think there's stuff there, it probably is because you didn't do a good job doing number 1, which was being concise in your descriptions. So let it go. Embrace the world that's being created with you, as opposed to just the version you have in your brain, right? Looking at that group exercise, like an improv game. You didn't have a table there, but another one of the players came in and put a table there. Now the table's there. And have fun with it, because it leads to a lot of interesting and exciting possibilities that I think oftentimes you don't necessarily get with the other games, because the graphic represents the reality as opposed to everyone's brains. And of course, finally, have fun. Game on. Talk to you later. And stay safe, right? Stay safe. Have fun. Talk to you later.